Okay, anyway, let's start. Does anybody else also has done the assignment? Has anybody done the assignment? Created a use case? Use case diagram, one of the UML diagrams. Create draws a use case diagram with querying VRD. Yes. Generally, the SDLC is waterfall, traditional ones. Yes. SOW, when it is baseline, BA goes through the SOW during the elicitation process, documentation process, ask you some questions. Usually consist of all. SOW does not consist of all use cases. It consists of all the high-level scope.
Okay.
Based on that, which you will draw the use case diagram. So use case would come in into the BRD. SOW will not have a use case diagram. So there may be a small correction there. We need to correct this point. Whether SOW is for a bank ATM system. Okay, so you have attempted a SOW for an ATM system. I hope everybody can see the screen. Just let me know in case it's not visible. Right. So there's a person who would come in and start up the system, would shut down the system. You said you are having a startup and shutdown functionality. Then check balance, deposit fund, withdraw cash, transfer cash, repair and maintenance. Okay. So let's go step by step. So who are all the actors in this? So obviously there is a customer. I think we are clear about that. Okay. There is an operator. So what would the operator do?
Operator generally starts up the systems and shut down the system. Like suppose if it is under maintenance or anything like that, then he is the person who will start up it and then shut down it for if there is some installation or anything. And he'll shut down and then again restart the system. For that reason, I have put an operator over there.
Okay, but what do we do in the startup and shutdown? I mean, is it like restarting the system or
yeah, it is a kind of a restarting of a system when there is any upgrades or anything made after maintenance.
But would it be part of the functionality? It's more like a maintenance activity, right?
Yeah, okay.
Right. So I mean, visualize it. So the system is up and running, and then there's some functionality which you have to add in there.
Right.
So it might not classify as a functionality of the system. So that is an activity which you would do, but it would not be a part of the functionality, right? It would be a maintenance activity. These two might not be the right use cases. Now, what I think could be part of an operator jobs would be, he would add in more cash, right? So let's say, on a daily basis, you'll have to refill the cash into the system, right? So you'll update it and then say, we've added so much cash with the $20 bills and $100 bills or whatever it is, right? So that's one activity I think which the operator would do. Okay. So another thing which I can think of which an operator would do is maybe he will add in the receipt paper or anything from a system point of view. Would look at it, right, and which needs access to the screens, and then he would fill in those details. I think that's something which an operator would do. Okay. Similarly, a technician also repairing and maintenance would not be an appropriate use cases. I don't think we can actually have one single role and then say add cash to the ATM machine and reconcile or generate some reports as an operator's functionality. Right? Again, that's so. Anyway, that you should have that depends on the understanding of our system. So because our understanding is limited, we are assuming something here. But in an ideal scenario, there would be a SME who would clearly tell us that there is an operator and he would do these activities.
Shutdown shouldn't be the preconditions. At least system startup should be a precondition.
So that's what I was saying. These two might not be relevant as a use case.
Yeah.
So you should
Those
not,
can be put as preconditions, right?
Yeah, the system can be up and running is something what you can mention.
But for the maintenance thing, suppose if a customer is trying to insert a card or something like that, and if it gets stuck into that, then the technician might come into picture, or else,
But he
in
would, so
scenarios.
that's what would he do
So
from a
there,
system
that
point?
will be an exception, right?
Not exception. It's more like an operational activity. It's a maintenance
Okay.
activity, which is, for any system it would be there,
Mm.
right? But it's not a functionality. Right? So you're not doing anything as a functionality there, right? So
Yeah.
that is the
Okay.
difference, right? Now all these are features or functionality of the system. Now this is a general maintenance or operational activity which the ops team would take care of. Okay.
Mhm.
So
Okay. So,
I think that
as per you,
maybe
like,
this
you have
is
to
not
remove.
the relevance.
Okay.
So you
Okay.
can just remove this and add
Mm-hmm.
add one use case. Right? So we can say
For
uh,
adding cash.
update, yeah, add cache and um, any other reconcile reports or something like that. Right? So
Okay.
again, I'm not clear about what the operator would be doing. So my assumption is one thing what I know is you would definitely come and add cache because
Okay.
unless somebody does, we cannot withdraw funds from the
Okay.
right. So that's one thing.
Mhm.
Okay. Now, I didn't get this part of it. So what is it that we're trying to say? What is it that when
Uh,
we say
whatever transaction we would be doing, like, checking the balance, depositing or withdrawal, it is associated at the back end, right? Where
right,
someone from the bank would be keeping a track of it, like whether he has been entered the correct PIN number or password. Once verified, then it is related to the bank at the back end. So I have added that bank. I did not know how to
right.
put that.
So maybe no, it's a misnomer. Rather than call it as a bank, let's say it's mostly the deposits system which should be taking
The
care. See,
system.
all your yeah. So it should be a deposit system maybe. Right? So I
Okay.
would call it as a deposit system.
Okay.
Right. So deposit system maintains all your account information, how much balance
Mhm.
does they have, and all that. So what the ATM would
Okay.
do is, if it wants to check the account balance, it
Mhm.
will send in a request to the deposit system and fetch it from there
Mhm.
and then display it. If I want to
Okay.
withdraw funds, so it will give
Mhm.
you it will first check whether this guy has enough balance. If he has,
Mhm.
then he will withdraw the cash, allow him to withdraw the cash, and then he'll go and update it as well. So debit this amount from this guy's account.
Mhm.
Okay, so that's how it would work, right? In most
Okay.
cases, it would be an integrated machine also. In some cases, all these in ATM as well as the backend system could be one single system. In that case, we
Mhm.
might not have to represent all these links to the other system, right? It will be within
Okay.
this. Okay.
Mhm. Yeah.
Uh, then I think for this part might not be required to be connected to deposits. Right?
Yeah.
Adding a cache is part of an ATM functionality. You don't need to connected to the disk ones. So maybe no.
Okay. Okay.
So this is what can
So adding cache, and suppose if it is like a reconcile report, that should not be connected to the system. You want to say
deposit
that?
system. Yeah, I mean, why would you
Oh,
see this is you're directly adding cash to the ATM, right? Now,
right.
so this so it doesn't
Okay.
need to connect to deposit system to get it done. So only the operator is going to do it.
Oh, I had a question about this.
Yeah.
So, what if basically do use cases have like relationship with each other? So, if some,
Yes.
for example, if I have to check balance and then deposit funds, would I be showing that in the use case diagram in itself?
No, that's see. I could see there. Those are independent activities. I would say, right?
Okay,
I could just check balance and then leave, right?
right.
Or I could check balance and then withdraw funds. I could check balance and deposit funds, right? So
Hmm.
there is no one sequence in which I would do it.
Okay,
Okay. So each one of them considered as separate activities. I can do any of these, and I can do all of these activities one after the other, and in any order. I can withdraw cash and then check for my balance.
okay.
I can check balance. So there need not be any sequence. The sequencing is not coming out in a use case diagram. It should not come actually.
But so I was actually looking online, and there was one use case in a bank ATM where it said validation. So every particular use case, say cash withdrawal, changing PIN, transactions, all of them go to validation and then they go to the bank system.
Like I said, I still have to cover the relationships in the use cases. So
Okay.
that's not yet covered, and I'll cover that topic. Okay.
Okay.
Like I said, in the earlier session, use cases can be linked to one another, right? So those we call it as validations.
Okay.
The relationships. Okay. Now there are primarily three types of relationship: generalization, include, and extends. Right. So we'll cover those relationships, but first let's get our basics right. Only once the basic concepts are clear, we'll be in a position to understand the advanced stuff.
Uh, the operator what we have mentioned, like it will add cache and reconcile. It doesn't need to be put the arrows to be extended to a system or something like that. Like here I have understood, like if a customer checks all these things, then it will be associated to deposit system. So similarly, those two activities, are they independent or should they be connected?
They're independent. I mean, I'll just come in, I'll enter the cache. Maybe that there would be a physical activity wherein I'll put the cache into the machine, into that slot, and then somewhere I have to update that this X amount of dollars of denomination 20 and then X amount of dollars of
that reports needs to be maintained, right? So I just wanted to know whether we can
so
put it.
that part would be your use case. So physically inserting the cache would not be a use case.
Okay.
You get it? So physically inserting is outside the system.
Right.
So you'll insert that, but somewhere you'll have to enter. I have inserted some $20 notes, some $1,020 notes, $1,100 notes, and that information has to be entered somewhere, right? So that is where this use case is. Okay. So it's not about physically adding the cache, because physically adding the cache we don't really need to create a use case for it.
I got it.
Now, see, the best way to look at it is visualize, be in that guy's role, and then see, why would I use the system for?
Right.
Okay? So if you are using the system, then only it should be a use case, right? So for checking the account balance, I actually use the screens and then perform some activities, and then only it will be found. So it makes sense to do that. But when I say repair, it's a vague thing, right? So I cannot actually visualize doing anything on the screen, right? So I'll not be using the system. So that's one I think basic check validation that you can perform, right? So put yourself in that actor's shoes and then figure out what he's what he's expected to you to do with the system. Okay.
Yeah. And the next thing which I have mentioned is like use case narrative for just the withdraw cache. I did not mention all, but only one use case I have.
So you said name is withdraw cache. You have given a number, author, then assumptions. The user has provided a valid card and password. Okay, you have a PIN number and card. Precondition, system would be in working conditions. Okay. Use case is initiation. This use case starts up. Now, what do you mean by use case initiation here? What is it?
Initiation means I had seen a format on net, and I found use case initiation when it will be triggered. So it will be triggered on demand. It means that.
All right. So yeah, and you can say that, or ideally, it should be like if you are withdrawing cash, it would be triggered by, it would be initiated by the user.
User. Okay.
So the customer. Okay?
Yeah.
The bank account holder. Okay. So initiation you could add in that. Use case dialog. The system asks for withdrawal amount. The user provides the amount. ATM verifies that amount is within the predefined policy limits, and the amount is divisible by defined denomination. Yeah.
Like it would be because we get that option, right? $1, $20, $5, like that. So that denomination should be there.
Right.
That will be taken.
Then
Otherwise.
Now I've told you. Did I cover about the use case?
The narrative one?
Did I talk about this screen in the last session?
Yeah, about the alternate flows and everything.
Right. The primary flow, alternate flow, and exception flows.
Yeah, you were very confused about it.
Instead of that, otherwise alternate flow I should have mentioned over there.
Right. Now, yeah. So I think fairly you have a good understanding, right? So, but at least if you can clearly call this out: primary flow, alternate flows, and exception flows.
Okay.
Right? So these basically are a core component of a use case narrative, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I would say these 5 things should definitely be there in a use case, right? And the more clearly you call out, the better, and you segregate it. Right now, I think everything is covered in your use case dialog, your primary and other alternate flows also.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, I'll so when you go for your requirement illustration, right? So you have to be very clear with your requirement. Now, this looks at a very high level, and when you start developing this, you'll have a lot of questions, right? Now, let me go step by step, and then I'll tell you how to critically look at a requirement and then ask those right questions, right? So your first step, what are you doing? You're first inserting the card there.
Yes, I would be inserting the card, and provided the assumption is like user he has entered a valid card and password, and then it would be following the steps.
Right. Okay. Now, so you're assuming that the PIN has been already validated, and only the you've selected the withdraw option, and from there it's working now.
Right.
All right. So you've entered an amount. Okay. So a primary flow would be you would select withdraw, you then enter amount, you would withdraw the cash, and then you would eject the card and then leave. Right?
Right. Right.
So the user is inputting the amount. Okay. Then ATM verifies that amount is within the predefined policy limits. Right. So because it's within that multiples, the user receives error message. What is the error message?
That I don't know. I mean, whatever
that would be one of the questions that you should be asking the SMS.
Asking
what
the
exactly is the error message, right? So there are 3 or 4 things that you should verify. So you have said that it should be in multiples of that. Let's say he enters like $51. You cannot. So that's one thing.
Right.
Should you check whether that amount is within is there in his balance in his account?
Yes, that has to be verified. I have mentioned that.
So that process has to be clearly explained. That you take the amount first, right? So you'll check whether it's a valid amount that you have entered. Right? The second check would be whether it's within the the limits, right? So maybe some ATMs have a daily limit. You can withdraw only, let's say, some $1,000 in a day.
Right.
Okay. So what if the user entered some $2,000?
Right.
Right. So that's the second check that you would perform.
Right.
Okay. Third check, you'll have to connect to the deposit system and then check whether this guy has enough balance. So let's say I have only $500 and I have entered $700
Right.
as a withdrawal. So I cannot withdraw $700. Right. So So those clearly the step-by-step process has to be coming out clearly. Now the ideal way to represent that would be using a flowchart.
How?
So it would be more pictorial to represent, or at least step-by-step step 1, step 2, step 3, right? So if you the main problem with writing in an English paragraph is it's very vague, right? So it doesn't give that structure. Okay, so pick to one of these 2 formats, right? Either show it using a flow chart, or you could even show screen-wise how the screen 1 would look like, what validations to perform, explain that, then go to screen 2 and then explain the details. So you can be as creative as possible. So there is no limit that you have to stick to this one single format. Okay, but you have to be clear with the process. Now, when you think through this, there are a lot of questions, and you have to pose these questions to the SME. Right, so that's where it becomes an interactive discussion, and you get all the requirements. So I'm not saying that you should know all these details right away, but you should have that critical thinking that these are the questions I should ask.
Right.
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 Right. If funds are available, ATM gives money and prints. So, right now all the details are covered, but it's not in a structured way, right? So what is the first check that you have to perform?
So
Whether
first,
you're checking it in
right,
multiple sources, right? Then what is the next check you are performing?
whether the available balance is there in his account or not.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, again, you have mixed up all the primary, alternate, and then the exception flows. Like, this is an exception. If you're not able to connect to the bank, the user receives errors. So
Those are
clearly demarcate that.
Right.
So if you demarcate it, and segregate it, it looks lot more structured.
Okay.
Otherwise, it's a good attempt. I think broadly it covers it. But usually, most of the organizations would have their template. In that, you will have to, work with that. Yeah. So, not good attempt.
Yeah, you really want to do that because it's like already half the time is over. I can send it over to you if you want to see, like, I
That's
can share my screen.
the reason being, only when you discuss these case studies, you'll get a lot more input, right?
Yeah,
So
because
I
I
think,
have captured, like I have done a lot of mistakes in there. I need to change it a little bit. And
all
then
right, if you
I
want
would
it to
like
be
to discuss
discussed
it.
tomorrow, we can do that.
Yeah, just,
That's okay. I mean, see, we are all here to learn. We are not
yeah,
here to point mistakes or anything. Right? The
yeah,
intention is to learn. So, right,
exactly.
the
Yeah.
more mistakes you make now, the less you will make in your actual job, right?
Yeah,
So,
no, like, with Drupali, it's like, I have seen, like, where I have made my mistakes. So I would
okay,
like to correct
good.
it first and then
So,
present.
that was the objective of this session. So rather than me just explaining something, right? So if you have actually reviewed some of the things that you have done, right?
Yeah,
It gives you, a lot of confidence. Now I think Rupali would be very clear about what needs to go into a typical
Yes.
use case, because she has gone through the process.
Yeah.
yeah.
Unless
But
you go
only
through the
she,
process
like,
and then figure out,
I
okay,
am, I am very clear, like, where I have made my mistakes and I would like to correct them.
right.
Sir, I
So,
can do one thing, like whatever you have asked me to do suggestion, I'll just make it suggestion and I'll email you.
yeah,
You
great.
can just verify at your end and then just mail me back.
I'll
I'll
do that.
email you on the same ID.
Yeah, you send it out the same ID. I think we can do
Okay,
that.
fine. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else has attempted anything which you want to share?
I did the same bank ATM, except I did not use the operator. My actors were basically technician and customer in the bank. So basically, I didn't write the narrative because I wasn't very sure about that one. My use case diagram was very similar to the one previously. So the actors were customer, ATM technician, and the bank, which you said this is supposed to be the depositor. I'm not exactly sure why, but if you can explain why this should be deposit system.
See, bank is a vague thing, right? So I mean, bank means it's an organization,
Okay.
right? But uh, it cannot be like you're connecting to an organization. Who in the organization,
Mm-hmm.
right? Are we talking to some person, or are we talking to some system, right? So that needs to be clear,
Okay.
right? So ideally, where do you store all this information about your account, your balance, and all? So there would be a deposit system supporting, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that system stores all your account information, or your balance information, your transaction information, right?
Okay.
So ATM, if you want to withdraw cash, what it does is ATM would, it would send a message to that guy. You know what? I have a customer coming over to me and asking to withdraw some $200. So tell me whether I should give it or not. Okay. Now the deposit system would say, okay, go ahead. He has some, $1,000 in his account. You can deduct. Give $200 to him. Okay. And then the ATM machine would give $200 to him, and then send out a message back. I have given him $200. You better deduct it from his account. Right. So for withdrawing cash, there is a series of transactions or steps that are involved. Right. So there are like 4 or 5 interactions between customer, the ATM, and the bank, the deposit system.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So that would come out as part of your primary flow.
Okay.
Okay. So here it's mostly at a high level you are saying I'm withdrawing cash, but the details are coming out only when you are going through the primary flow.
Okay. So basically,
that is where your narrative would give you the clarity. Okay?
right.
If you have attempted that narrative, then you would have got, okay, now how does my cash flow functionality work,
Right.
right? So
Right.
that will give you the details about it.
Okay. And I wasn't sure about this ATM technician, why you didn't include it in the use case, even though this
Now,
shouldn't this be functional as well?
so what do we mean by repair? So I'm trying to understand here.
So basically, what I understood, actors were anyone who's associated with the ATM, who's going to work on the ATM, be it receiving information or being a customer, basically.
Yes.
So ATM technician would also work on the machine, right? So if it breaks down, he's going to be the one fixing it and going through the software system as well.
So what do we mean by breakdown? So okay, let's pick this one. When you say repair, what all activities would be there as part of repair?
Maybe the where you insert the card that's broken, or maybe the software needs updating, and it has to be updated through the ATM itself. I mean,
Right.
I just thought that might be one of the cases where ATM technician has to be there.
Yeah, can I say something? Doesn't this maintenance and repair, these are technical parts and nothing to do with the software thing?
So it would be a operational activity, right? So maintenance and repair would happen, right? But it would happen for any system, right? So I have to go and upgrade maybe the OS, or maybe I have a newer version of the system, right?
Okay.
But am I using the ATM system, right? The screen, am I actually using the system to perform some activity there? Not exactly. I'm upgrading the system, or maybe using a newer version of the software there. So installing that software, right?
Right.
So, but maintenance to an extent, if you are adding cash, right? So that would be a considered as a within the scope of the work, right? So let's say I'll add physically machine cash into the machine, and then I'll have some screen there where I would say, I've added these amounts and update it. So that part where you are actually using a screen and then doing some work would be a use case.
Right.
So some of things happen outside the system. Some of them would be a maintenance activities. Some of them would be functional activities. So
Right.
usually in a use case diagram, you only capture the functional part.
Okay.
So again, other thing I would like to say is when you're looking out on the internet, be a little more cautious about the documents that you see, because people just upload whatever they so there is no credibility to that.
Right.
So unless it's coming from a credible source, take it with a pinch of salt, I would say.
My understanding was when you do maintenance, you use the ATM software, and building that maintenance part of it would also be part of the software feature. I mean, that was my understanding of it.
No, I would say that would be more of an operational activity, maintenance activity, and it won't be a functional activity.
Okay.
Right? So I'm not using the system to get some desired behavior out of it.
I get it.
So focus on only the functionality when you're talking about a use case diagram.
Okay.
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 Yeah. Overall, good. I think see, unless you put this one diagram and then write one narrative,
Right.
you will not be clear about the requirement, or even it gives you a lot more clarity on your elicitation techniques. Right?
Absolutely.
So how do I get the details about each? Now, if I ask you, what is there in maintenance, then you will start thinking, okay, what is the process of maintenance? What exactly? Now, if I ask you for withdraw cash, at least you're clear that you first enter the card, then enter the amount, and then the request goes to the deposit system. You'll get a response back. You'll withdraw you'll eject the cash, and then you'll send a message back to the deposit system to detect that. So the sequence of events there. So the primary flow, alternate flow, all that would come into place, right? Some of them would be vague. We will have to depend on the SME to understand it. So like for this maintenance, even you are not clear, I am not clear, because neither of us are SMEs. Right? So we will purely depend on the SME. We'll ask questions and get the responses. Right? So that is how we understand the requirements.
Okay. I had one more question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So basically, while I was making this diagram, I wasn't sure if in a normal use case diagram, do you make arrows as to how the relationship goes? I wasn't exactly sure.
Yes. The arrows define the type of relationship it is. I'll cover that when I talk about the relationship.
Okay.
The way you represent the arrow, if it's a point, if it's a block arrow like this, it means a generalization actually.
Okay. Yeah.
So I'll explain this later when we look at it.
Right.
Okay? So some syntax is there involved there. We'll learn that as well.
Okay.
The other thing I thought I should bring up is, your ability to think through and ask those right questions. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, related to the same example, I think, some time back I came across a fraud scenario. Right? Now, we could have easily avoided that if we have done a good analysis about the requirement. Right? Now, some of the ATM machines earlier had this feature where, if the user doesn't pick the cash for some time, right? So they'll give some 10 seconds time or so, and the user doesn't pick the cash, right? The ATM machine pulls it back, okay, and it used to credit it back to his account, right? So that looks like an awesome feature, right? Mm-hmm. So I mean, there is a, if the user forgets to take the cash, I'm pulling it back, so the money is not lost, right? Now, some guy, what he thought was, he inserted some, let's say $1,000, and when it popped up some 10 notes, he picked up 5 out of that, okay, and 5 he kept it that way.
Okay.
So the machine pulled it back, pulled those $500, and credited back $1,000, right? So this guy has misused the system. So if you had actually thought through, when you're pulling the cash back in, you should actually count it back again, right? Mm-hmm. Now that process was missed out. That step was missed out. So if you have actually identified that step, you could have avoided that fraud. So all that actually, critical thinking would come in, and it would be the responsibility of a business analyst. So, when you're capturing the requirement, you have to ask a lot of questions. What if this happens? What if the user picks up half the cash? What if the user does not pick the cash? Right? And ask those questions to the SME. The SME would tell you what to do, but you'll have to point it. There is a loophole over here, or this could be misused here, or this could lead to a. You have to actually think through the process, visualize how it finally would be done, and if there is something wrong which you think can go wrong, you should clearly point that out. Okay, that's where your critical thinking, analytical thinking would come into place. Otherwise, we are not just scribes to take what the SME tells and then document it, right? So we'll have to ensure that the system is foolproof. One way to look at it is, why would the user enter it? But there are enough instances where people have shown that they can think much different from what everybody thinks through, right? So those different types of questions should be asked, and then that is where your analytical thinking would come, right? So go through each step critically. That is where your contribution to the project. So I think we covered this screen, right? So I know we spent a lot of time on this, but this is required. So ideally I spend 2 sessions in reviewing your use cases, because if I just keep saying, you won't learn much unless we take up some examples and then say that we could have done this in a different way. That's when it registers much more impactfully. Okay. So don't think that we're wasting time here. This is actually the best way you learn stuff. I'll talk about this topic today, and then relationships will cover in tomorrow's session. Okay. Now, how do you approach a use case? Right. So broadly, there are these 2 approaches which we follow. Right. Again, I wouldn't recommend one way or the other. So it depends upon your preferences, which thing you which you think is good. You can use that. Right. The first one is, you figure out who are all the people who will use the system. Right. Now, if you are developing a library management system, would the librarian use it? Would the library user use it? Is there anybody else using it? You'll have to figure that out. If you are developing a hospital management system, Is the receptionist using it? Is the doctor using it? Is the the patient also using it? Right? So figure that out. So figure out who are the people who are using that system, who are interacting with that system. Right? All of them becomes the actors. Right? Once you have identified the actors, then figure out what would he use the system for. Okay. If you ask this question, then you will say, what, as a user, I would do this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. As a supervisor, I would do this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Right. So you'll figure out the the benefits you would get by using that system. Right. So usually each one of them would turn out to be a use case. Okay. So that's an actor-based method. Okay. So you can use other approaches also. I'm not saying these are only two things, but broadly use these methods. These are most widely used methods, right? So the first one you would use an use case based method. The second one is mostly an event based method, right? So this approach would be like you look at a process, right? So you look at the chain of the value chain of your system, right? So what is happening, right? So step by step. So if you pick up a typical system, so you would first register your customers, then you will take orders, you will process the order, you will raise invoice, then you will get payment, right? So this is the value chain, I would say, of what the system would offer, right? If you pick up any other system like maybe a shopping cart. So you register as a customer, then you will browse through the product, then you add products to your shopping cart, then you would make the payment, and then you should be able to track your delivery as well, right? So broadly, you're figuring out what are all the events. Then each event you will figure out, who are the people involved in it, right? So what if there are more than two actors, you'll link them up, but you'll figure out what all the people that are associated with that particular use case, right? Actors, right? So either way you can do it. So use one way to ensure that you create a use case, another one to validate whether everything is covered or not, right? And once you have created a use case, validate it against your SOW, the scope what you have listed there. Is everything covered or not? Okay. Ideally, whatever is listed in the SOW, right, should have been covered in your use case diagram. It should have been addressed in the use case diagram. Okay. And some of the questions which will help you, figure out what use cases should be, right? So, what would each actor do? Once you identify the actor, figure out what they're going to do. Why are they using this system, right? Whether they will create or modify or change any information. Okay. Then does a user needs to get some notifications? Okay. Does he needs to be informed either by email or SMS or maybe within the system, right? So that could be another question that you need to ask. Okay. And finally, validating against your SOW. Do all of the requirements are they covered by the use cases? So ideally, you'll do that by using the traceability. Okay. So that's approaches that you can follow for creating the use cases. Right. Now, see if you're working on a full-fledged system, right? So you're starting on a new application, right? So this is the most critical part, creating the use case diagram, and then the rest of it is basically capturing the details about each use case. A lot of time you actually have to spend to get that bigger picture of how to create the use case. Then as and when you get the details, you'll think, okay, this use case could have been split into two separate use cases, or we could have some additional relationships and all, right? So all that would come in. So the next session I would cover about the relationships, or rather the session after that. What I would do is the next session I would take some mock interview kind of session, right? So I'll pick up some, I'll so ask questions on the topics that we have covered today, right? On the elicitation techniques, on the planning aspects, the scope management, like traceability, the change management process, right? I'll pick up, you know, so do a brush up onto all your topics that we have covered till date. We'll have more of a mock interview kind of sessions. We'll discuss on the questions that you could get onto the
Sir,
topics.
one more thing before you close off, the link which they have provided us on that, each and every session of yours is not there. A few of them are there, and it's been, like in a random manner, so we are not able to figure out which was the first session, or like basically, can you please just ask somebody to just put in all the sessions which you have covered till date, and probably give them some date.
Let me look at it. I'll check that
Yeah.
and then mention.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, Raju, I want to announce one more thing.
Yeah, Manja.
Yeah, for all the guys, I just wanted to let you know that Raju will be taking tomorrow mock interviews for most of the students. I mean, all of them. Okay. I mean, he will be picking up one by one, but the thing is, like, everybody has to answer the questions. So, from the day he started, it might be related to BRDs and all that stuff. So, guys, be prepared, okay? Because we need to make sure that you guys are understanding things, and we have to start working on the resumes and everything. So that's why I'll be sending emails again to everyone. So guys, be prepared for tomorrow's class. Okay.
Yeah. So we'll focus only on the topics that we have covered till date, so that the interview, whatever questions I would ask would be only on the topics that we have covered.
Yep.
Right. So the rest of the topics we'll have one more session where once we have covered all the topics, then we'll have another session with the mock interviews.
So you will
Okay.
ask questions to all of us, like everybody has to answer.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
Manju.
So,
Manu
so
sir,
all
I'm
of you
not
need to be
getting any
prepared.
emails
So
from your side though.
No, I didn't send any email.
make sure that I could just pick up in for whatever we have learned. You will learn what kind of questions you could be expecting in interviews, right? So even though if you're not prepared, I would still suggest you come out to and attend tomorrow's session, right? Because it will give you more insights about what you can expect in your interviews and all. Okay. All right then. So we'll meet again tomorrow. Thank you. Good night.
Good night.